Greetings, and welcome to Roman of the Empire. I'm your host, Roman. This week we're going to talk about the Book of Boba Fett, Episode 3, The Streets of Mos Espa, or as I like to call it, the Crime Lord with a Heart of Gold. This week's episode was again written by Jon Favreau and directed by Robert Rodriguez, who directed the first episode of the season. I didn't like this episode. I'm not going to lie. It's hard for me to even say I liked parts of it because there was so much I didn't like about it. Again, I'm going to go into my general impressions and then we can jump into the spoilers afterwards. I mentioned this in the last review. The pace of the show is alarmingly slow. And I'm not saying it's got to be all gunslingy all the time, but in a Star Wars show, one expects a certain level of action. And Boba Fett riding through the desert on a bantha is not that. So I thought the elements of the episode were very contrived, very lazy. I'm disappointed in the writing of Jon Favreau and the direction of Robert Rodriguez. There's no character growth. The story is just trudging along. Mos Espa looks incredibly underpopulated given that it's a major spaceport, as does Boba's crime family. What crime family? It's Boba, Fennec, a couple of pig dudes, and that robot. And then he does get some add-ons in this episode, and we'll talk about that later. It's not a crime family. It's not a gang. It's not even a crew. It's a couple of folks hanging out in a big old palace with an empty Rancor pit. That's the way the show is going, though, and that's not great. The add-ons this week were very underwhelming. You had a couple of cameos. Danny Trejo is in there. Stephen Root plays Lortha Peel, who we'll talk about a little bit. And you recognize him from Office Space. He played Milton. I'm going to burn this whole place down. Where's my stapler? Boardwalk Empire and Justified. He was great on Justified as a judge. Those were your guest stars this week. Bulba is a terrible crime boss. He's really not much of a crime boss. He forgives everything. In the mob world, he could have been taken out almost immediately. He's not ruling through respect. He's not ruling at all. He does very little. He gets his ass kicked all the time. And when he does, it's just the cost of doing business. It's not. I'm very disappointed in this Boba Fett. Expect more out of my Boba Fetts. So dispute of the crime activity in Mos Espa continues. If you'll remember, last week the Hutts showed up again to claim their former cousin's territory. We get more flashbacks to Boba's time with the Tuskens. I didn't care. And that it makes me sad because I was looking forward to the show, thought it was going to be cool. Started off all right, but it's been a real quick downward trajectory. I'm going to jump into spoilers now because I don't think I need to really discuss it that much further. If you're going to be watching the show, you're going to be watching the show. Frankly, I'm having a hard time continuing to watch the show after this episode. I'm going to watch it just so I can see can they bring it back? But right now, So, again, we're in spoilers at this point. We pick up this episode with Lortha Peel. Who's played by Stephen Root, as I mentioned before. He's a water merchant. He comes to talk to Boba. He doesn't have an audience with him, but he lets him in anyway. Starts talking about how the crime is running rampant in the streets and how it's disrespectful to Boba, and specifically how a group of cyborgs is stealing his water. He's a water merchant. And how that's an insult to Boba, and blah, 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 and I'll double my tribute to you if you take care of this for me, blah, blah, blah. So Boba and Fennec go and check it out. Turns out that Lortha is basically, he's a water gouger. He's a price gouger, like a gas gouger, except it's water because it's Tatooine. And the cyborg gangs is basically a bunch of youths riding Hover-Vespas. I hated this so much. I hated that it was a group of children with cyborg interplane. With children, they're late teens, early 20s. We're really tough. They came off as really tough, riding their Vespas. They looked like a bad 80s band. It was dreadful. It was just such a bad, including them in this show. They should have been ruffians, actual no shits. I don't care what they rode. Honestly, they could have been on foot. It didn't matter. But they don't come off as particularly menacing. They come off as the Lost Boys in most Espa. Except there's a girl in the gang, but you get my point. So Boba goes, he finds out that basically he's a water gouger. He recruits the Vespa Gang because he doesn't have any other employees. And he admonishes the water guy, Mr. Peel, for being a douche. And that's all you're going to do about it? And he throws him 500 credits when he asks for like 1,200. And he's on his way. Back at Boba's, he's in his tank again because he spends an unusual amount of time there. And flashback to Tusken times. He's basically part of their tribe now. He's an honorary member of the tribe. If you'll remember last week, he told the Pike Gang, the fish people, that they needed to pay tribute to the Tuskens for using their territory. So Boba is going to collect this tribute. So he's riding Mos Eisley. It's a long ride on a bantha. The banthas, if you're unaware, are not a particularly speedy critter. It's a step. I don't know how long it took him. It felt like it took him a long time. I felt like I was there a long time. He finally gets there. He goes in to meet the Pike Gang, the fish people, who say, well, this other crime syndicate, well, however fish people talk. It's not how they talk. But this other crime syndicate is claiming, is already collected protection money, toll, whatever you want to call it, for that territory. And they don't want to pay two people for the same thing. And Boba's like, I'll go take care of it. What? You're going to go take care of it? The most feared bounty hunter in the galaxy should have said, piss off, give me my money, and then I'll go take care of it. That's not what he did. He's like, all right, fine. And he leaves. So he goes back to where the Tuskens are hanging out and finds out they've all been slaughtered while he was gone. That doesn't speak very well of really anybody in this situation. Who did it? Who killed the Tuskens while Boba was gone? And I don't want to sound heartless about this, but it kind of comes down to who cares. It just wasn't. You didn't get a lot out of that. But Boba's kind of sad. He burns the body ceremoniously, but you didn't get a lot of impact out of this. And that's the way I feel about a lot of the elements of the episode. This should have been an emotionally impactful scene. But for me, and I think probably for a lot of viewers, it really wasn't. You were like, oh, geez, they killed the Tuskens. What's he going to do now? But it wasn't like, man, that sucks. That's horrible. You don't really get that. And I suppose you're supposed to see parallels to our modern and less modern history, but putting that aside, it didn't have the impact that they were aiming for, I suspect. So Boba gets woken up suddenly from his tank slumber as Chrysanthemum, the big Wookie from the previous episode, the bounty hunter, is pulling him out of the tank. Boba's getting his ass kicked around. He's wearing his his whatever little shorts he wears when he's in the resurrection recuperation tank, whatever you want to call it. So he's not quite naked, but he's not really in a position to be. And the floor is all wet, and he's sliding around. The big Wookiee's pissed off, and then the Vespa Gang comes in to rescue him. The children, the Lost Boys, come in to save Boba Fett. It just turns into a big shit show, and then Fennec ends up knocking him into the empty Rancor pit. There wasn't a lot to be. It was a messy fight. It wasn't a particularly interesting fight. Boba gets his ass kicked. The big Wookiee gets his ass kicked. The kids get their ass kicked. It's not fantastic. So the Hutts show up next day to apologize for trying to have Chrysanthemum kill Boba, and say they're leaving. They're leaving Tatooine as the crime territory has been promised to another crime syndicate. So these are Hutts. They're terrifying. It's bad for business. We're going to go. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Great. So we find out ultimately that it's the Pike Gang. The mayor of the town is working with the Pike Gang, and that's going to be their new crime territory. Of course, Boba's thinking back to his history. You had your foreshadowing with him going to Mos Eisley, and then this wasn't terribly long ago, though, in terms of the universe. We don't really get a fair amount of time. I mean, it hasn't been that long, though. So the Pike Gang, the trained people, assuming they're somehow involved with the slaughter of the Tuskens. I don't think that's probably too big a reach. So the Hutts leave. They give Boba a new Rancor as a gift, because that's what we do now. And he frees Chrysanthemum, who runs off. Instead of killing him, Boba should have killed an awful lot of people. By this point, he's just like, that's the price of doing business. I understand. Great. And the Pikes are arriving, and Boba, they're arriving in Mos Espa. One of the children, cyborg Lost Boys, told him this. And Boba's like, we need to get ready for war. How? You don't have anybody. You have no one. It's you, Fennec, the couple of pigmen who seem largely useless, and the Lost Boys, the Vespa Gang. That's it. That's your whole deal, man. You can't go to war. You're not the A-team. You can't pull this off. It was just so disappointing. Boba Fett has no spine. He's a pushover. The Rancor turns out to be basically a big dog. That scene was just depressing. And the Vespa Gang is just terrible. The Pike Gang could literally walk into Mos Espa and say, we're here, the fish people, and we're taking over. And that would take about as long as 45 minutes, as short as 20 minutes. And it would be done, over, because there's no defenses. And Boba hasn't established himself as a crime lord. He's established himself as that nice fellow down the street who wears a helmet that we give money to for reasons we don't know, because he actually can't provide protection to anyone. No one seems to have much to do in Mos Espa in general. They're just kind of hanging out in the street, except for the cantina lady and the mayor, who's run off with the Pikes, and the mayor's lousy assistant who just always is trying to avoid a meeting. I was worried about this in the last episode. The pace of the show isn't good. There is no growth. And I don't care about these characters. I cared about Boba Fett. I liked Boba Fett. Everybody liked Boba Fett. But this isn't the Boba you were wanting, were expecting, were looking for. If they keep up like this, the only people who are going to be watching this show are the pigmen, while they're on break, not protecting Boba Fett. Not great. I'm going to put out a couple more videos soon about some other stuff that I am watching, which I am enjoying a great deal. One of the shows is new, one of the shows is not new, but it's still worth talking about because it is still current. I'm just new to the show. So we'll be looking in on what is Roman of the Empire watching when he's not being disappointed by Boba Fett. As for now, I am Roman of the Empire. Please like and subscribe. Signing off. Be kind.